Welcome to How to Let Go of a Narcissist with the Trauma Bond Detox Method. So, this is going to be in 5 different parts, and what we're talking about is mostly how do we manage the separation from a narcissist. Most of the people that are in this situation have gotten there innocently. They tend to be highly compassionate people, caring people, givers, and somehow have gotten hooked up with a narcissist and are trying to break away, or in some cases, trying to figure out how to live happily together with a narcissist. So let's get into it. First, this disclaimer. This basically just says, I'm not your medical doctor. If you have medical issues or concerns, please see them and don't let anything that we talk about or teach here stop you from seeing competent medical care. You'll have a copy of this, of course, and read it in detail if you like. This next part is a safety protocol. So during the course of this, we're going to be talking about some of the experiences that you may have had or may yet have with a narcissist. For some of you, this may be emotionally triggering, where it makes you feel anxious, or in some cases, maybe a little depressed, or in some cases, maybe a little bit panicky. So this is a process that I want you to have kind of under your belt in case you get feeling a little bit triggered, and this will help you regain your sense of balance, give you a chance to sort of pause and get your composure back. This will also be a great tool as you go through your life, especially with your narcissist, in learning how to manage those excessive emotions that sometimes get triggered. So the first is recognize when you're getting flooded. So as we read here, acknowledge the signs of emotional flooding, such as feeling overwhelmed, feeling intense emotions, or a sense of losing control. So those are boundary violations. That's where something's happened that's taking you out of your own energy. When you notice that happens, or you notice that it's about to happen, that's when you need to think, okay, I need to probably take a safety protocol. So the first thing we're going to do is called the butterfly technique. So you're going to cross your arms over your shoulders and tap on your upper arms or your shoulders, or sometimes you'll interlock your thumbs and tap on your collarbones. Either way, any of these work. What this does is it stimulates both sides of your brain, and it sort of helps regulate your emotions. So we're going to tap left and right alternately, and you're going to just tap at a slow rhythmic pace. And I want you to just notice the sensations in your body and how they change as you do this. So what we're doing is we're paying attention to the feelings in your body rather than the thoughts in your head. So do this for however long it takes. I'm suggesting here at least 1 or 2 minutes until you feel a sense of calmness. Sometimes it may take more than that or longer than that. Don't feel bad if it does. The next is, if you have a chair and you're sitting down, please sit with your feet flat on the floor. And if it's possible, ground your hands on your thighs. Now I will say this works independently, but it also works if you do it at the same time as you're tapping. So I'll demonstrate it while you're tapping. So I'm going to ask you to breathe in deeply through your nose. You're going to fill your lungs completely, and then at the inhale peak. So when you get to the very top, I'm going to ask you to take a little extra breath or a gasp. So, and then hold it. That's important. Then exhale slowly and completely through your mouth, ensuring that all of the air is expelled. So it would look like this. And I like to have you collapse your lungs at the end to get that last breath out. And do this 2 or 3 times. Sometimes you'll need to do this for several minutes. But as you do this, you'll find that it regulates your body and brings you back into more yourself and out of your panic or survival brain. One last technique is just a simple grounding technique. And this is just to activate your senses about other things. So in this case, you're just simply going to name 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can touch, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. If you add these three together in some kind of a combination, you should be able to get yourself out of a panic mode or a stress response and back into a safety mode. If during the course of some of these protocols, or if in the course of some of this coursework, you find that you need to take a break, just turn the computer off or put it on pause, take whatever break you need, take a nap if you need, get a glass of water, make sure you're safe. Okay, so let's talk about the trauma bond detox method. There's 5 steps to this method. And our goal here is that by employing these 5 steps, within 30 days, you should be in a position where you feel much more regulated and able to go on, make the choices you need to in your life. So the first is what we're doing here, which is discussing what the trauma bond detox method is. Then in the next video, we're going to talk about what is a trauma bond, how you get into it. We're then going to talk about the application of EFT or emotional freedom techniques. Sometimes this is called energy psychology or tapping. We're going to talk about what that is, and then we're going to specifically go into exercises about how to use it to break the trauma bond, which is where we separate the emotional response from the logical response. And then last, we're going to talk about how to set boundaries and reclaim joy. So let's keep going. What is a trauma bond? So as it says here, a trauma bond is an emotional attachment that is the result of repeated cycles of abuse and then positive reinforcement. I love you, I hate you, I want you, I don't want you, I need you, I don't need you. Those things repeated over and over and over again may not seem like a trauma. It's not like you've been to war or you've seen a shooting or something. But these things repeated over and over and over for sensitive people like you probably are do constitute a trauma. And the intermittent on and off nature of it, the yes, the no, the start, the stop, are very dysregulating. And what ends up happening is the stress response that it creates causes you to attach to the person that's doing it as a means of safety. And that's what creates the trauma bond. So logically, you may know this is not good for me. I'm being abused. I'm being taken advantage of. And yet emotionally, you feel the need to draw closer to them or to reach out to them or to try and integrate them into your life because at some level, your body is saying that's how we maintain safety. So that's what a trauma bond is. Some people will liken this to Stockholm syndrome, which is what happens when hostages start to connect or bond with their hostage takers. Very similar. It's also sometimes called a love addiction, and we'll get into that a little bit more. So I want to tell about an interesting experience in Great Britain where a construction worker accidentally stepped on a nail. And when he looked down and saw the point of the nail sticking out the top of his boot, he immediately had just terrible pain and cried out, called for help. Finally, they called an ambulance. They had to put him on a stretcher. They had to administer morphine, make painkillers, and took him to the hospital. At the hospital, the emergency room team had to cut his boot off to get it off of his foot. And imagine their surprise when, as they got the boot off, they noticed that the nail had passed between his toes, hadn't actually gone into his foot at all. There was not even any blood. You may wonder, why the pain? The reason that I want to tell this story is because the body, your brain, makes beliefs and delivers actions based on those beliefs. When it looked at that nail coming from the shoe out of the top, it just assumed that it had gone through the foot and knew that that should cause pain, and so it sent pain. It isn't that he didn't feel the pain. He absolutely felt the pain. But it's important to recognize that the pain came from here, not from his foot. It came from his brain or his mind. Now you might ask, well, what does that have to do with my narcissistic partner or my trauma bond? And the answer to that is that a trauma bond is also a mistake your brain is making. It's looking at a situation and it's probably seeing a behavior or a response to a behavior that may have started or have had its roots years and years ago, possibly even as a child, which at the time may have been a really appropriate response, but which it's repeating now because it never learned to do something different and it's no longer appropriate. Maybe not even helping, might be hurting. So let's talk about what some of those mistakes might look like. The first of the top 3 mistakes that your brain makes in a trauma bond is equating familiarity with safety. So let's imagine that you experienced neglect or abuse as a child. And being a child, you were biologically wired to have to draw closer to your caregiver. Let's say they were your parents, in order to maintain safety. If you did that long enough, it began to feel familiar. And whatever the distress you were experiencing, the neglect or the abuse, in spite of the fact that it was painful and wrong, your body is still saying these people are your means to safety. You have to have them to survive. And so you developed a familiarity with those kinds of behaviors and responses. So after you've grown up, you've moved out, you're on your own, you're independent, and you meet another person and you have that same walking on eggshells feeling, perhaps, or some of the other responses you may have developed, it feels familiar. And sometimes that familiarity feels like safety. So that's one of the mistakes your brain makes. The second mistake your brain typically makes is mistaking attachment for love. So if you haven't grown up in a home or a place where normal love and affection occurred, and you had this intermittent approval, disapproval, you may have been confused about what love actually looks like. And you may have assumed that that kind of behavior was love. That's what love was. And this need that you had to attach yourself to them for safety seemed like that must be love. So when you get into a narcissistic relationship with a partner, marriage partner, or love interest, and you attach to them because of the preconditioning, it feels possibly like you're in love. Now, that doesn't mean that you may not also be in love, but it's easy to confuse this attraction and attachment you have to what's familiar as love. And so frequently you'll be in an abusive situation with a narcissist and need to separate and just feel attracted and want to go back. But I love him. I need him. And it's possible that a great deal of that sensation is actually the attachment part of the bond rather than actual love. When you stop and think about it, true love requires reciprocity, both parties giving equally. And very few narcissistic relationships are equal and represent the kind of love that we'd normally want to consider in a reciprocal relationship. The next mistake that the brains make in a trauma bond is what we call overvaluing positive reinforcement. So the narcissist knows exactly what to do to keep you on the hook just a little bit longer. A little act of kindness, a little smile, perhaps a gift, just enough to pull you back in. And your brain sees that and says, oh, that's the person. That's the one I'm trying to find. And of course, because you're compassionate and understanding, you're thinking that perhaps you were sent to him or her to try and help them find their way. And so those little breadcrumbs, we sometimes call them, keep giving you hope that they're going to change. They're never going to change. But it keeps you coming. And that's part of the trauma bond, is this constant hope that, yes, they're going to change. Things are getting better. We're going to get back to normal. And you're going to remember the great times, the love bombing in the beginning, when they seemed like the absolutely perfect person. You think, oh yeah, we're going back. We're going to get there. When actually it's just one of the means that they use in the trauma bond to keep you trapped. So how do we get out of this trauma bond? Well, first of all, you have to recognize that your brain is making this mistake. You have to realize that your body is having an unconscious response to attach to a person who isn't safe for one reason or another, in one way or another. Realizing that, accepting that, is the number one reason why people are unable to leave a narcissist. It's because they keep hoping that he's going to change, or they keep feeling like, no, this is love. I really love him. that attachment is so strong. So it's important to get to the point where you recognize, okay, my brain is making a mistake. It learned a behavior at some time in the past that made me think and feel like this was love when it's not really. Very important. That's the first step. And that's part of what we're doing here, is helping you recognize that pattern. The next is to emotionally detach. So if you think of any experience that you have, we could divide it into two parts. One is your logical memory of what happened. It was transactional, this, and then this, and then this. But at the same time, it brings with it this package of emotional memories as well. This happened and I felt this. This happened, I smelled this, I saw this, I heard this. So all of these different emotions come into play. And those are sometimes called flashbacks or triggers. And it's what keeps you trapped, because these things put you back into survival brain, or back into that stress response. And that's what makes it so hard to leave. So we do a process that's going to break those two apart. You've still got them both, but they're no longer automatically tied together, so that when an event happens, a triggering event, it doesn't automatically trigger the emotional response, which might include, fear, anger, frustration, sadness, whatever it is. So we're going to break those two apart. It's gentle though, so don't worry. The next is to build boundaries. So you've got to figure out what your non-negotiables are. There are certain things where when we cross this line, I get triggered. When we cross this line, I go into survival mode. And survival mode, or this stress response, generally is fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Not everybody's familiar with fawn, but fawn is basically people pleasing. You try and avoid the situation by making everything right, solving all the problems, never being the problem, taking the blame for things. And that's frequently a situation with people who are in a narcissistic relationship. So we have to identify what the boundaries are and what the triggers are, and know this is the line I'm not going to cross. So just once again, recognizing the triggers, recognizing when you go across and you start to feel triggered, so important. Then last, we're going to talk about how to heal and move forward. We're going to do some of these energy psychology exercises to help do that as well. So that's our process. Let's talk for just a minute about what is EFT and trauma-informed EFT. So as I said before, EFT is emotional freedom techniques. This has been around forever. I've been working it and trained in it since the 1980s, which tells you how old I am a little bit. But this has been studied extensively. There's over 200 peer-reviewed critical studies on this that clearly make the connection between how we separate the emotions from the actions, logic, emotion, conscious, unconscious, and its effectiveness. It's one of the few modalities that is recognized and supported as being so useful in PTSD. Many people who come into a narcissistic relationship either have had PTSD or complex PTSD, or get it while they're in that relationship. The distinction between PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, and complex PTSD is, if you think about PTSD, it's if you think of returning soldiers from war, people who have had these traumatic events in their life. Complex PTSD is that slow drip, reinforcement, intermittent, and then abuse. On, off, on, off. It's the eggshells, it's the neglect that just drags on over a long period of time. So to have a traumatic experience, it's not quite require a giant event. And especially for a highly sensitive person, many smaller things that other people might not even think about can still be traumatic for a highly sensitive person. So EFT is the process we use to help disconnect those emotions from those facts or memories. So there's two parts to it. We always talk about the brain that's in your head, that's your logical brain, the brain that's in your heart, that's your emotional brain. We also sometimes talk about the brain in your gut, which is your somatic brain. We're going to engage all three. But really what we're trying to do is both understand logically what's going on, and then understand what emotions it triggers and feelings in the body. And then by doing that, we have a process where we can basically separate those so they don't happen at the same time. And that is how we detach your emotional flashbacks and triggers. All right, see you on the next video.